All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I won't say too much, and then I'll turn it over to Katherine Luscher, who's our presenter tonight. Katherine is National Audubon Society's Tufted Puffin Conservation Coordinator out of Oregon. And as her title and the slide on her presentation suggests, she's going to talk to us about Tufted Puffin conservation. So, Katherine, take it away. We're excited to hear from you tonight.
Wonderful. Let's see. All right. Um, as Kevin said, my name is Katherine Luscher, and I'm the Tufted Puffin Conservation Coordinator with National Audubon's Seabird Institute. And I'm very grateful to join you this evening from Portland, Oregon. This is actually my first time in Arkansas, so thank you for inviting me. First, a quick disclaimer. Though I have worked in conservation for the past 25 plus years, my background experience is geared towards community engagement, facilitation, and project management. That is to say, I am not a biologist, but I do work closely with Tufted Puffin researchers, and I do have Tufted Puffin in my name, so I'm at least partially qualified to be here with you this evening. I thought I'd begin with a really quick Tufted Puffin 101 and provide a high-level overview of the puffin's life cycle. And then I'd like to share some of the work that we've recently started here in Oregon. Tufted puffins are the largest of the three puffin species, the other two being the Atlantic puffin and the horned puffin, with the rhinoceros auk, sometimes called a unicorn puffin, a close relative. Tufted puffins, horned puffins, and rhinoceros auks are all found on the West Coast, though for some reason, it's the Atlantic puffins that you will see in our gift shops here in the Pacific Northwest. It's something I'm slowly attempting to tackle, but that Atlantic puffin has a really impressive marketing team. Tufted puffins are about 16 inches tall and weigh about 1.5 pounds. They are a pelagic seabird, meaning they come to land only to breed. They live an average of 20 years, though there are reports of some of them living upwards of 30 or more years. They can fly 55 miles an hour, and they can dive 200 feet in the water to catch their prey. In fact, the puffin's football-shaped bodies are much better suited for swimming than flying. So much so that in the 17th century, the Catholic Church deemed them to be more fish than bird, and thus were permissible to eat during Lent. And though I'm not a scientist, I can confirm that they are definitely a bird. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in Oregon. All 363 miles of the Oregon coastline are public, and all 1,800 of our offshore coastal rocks, reefs, and islands are protected under the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge Complex, which was established in 1935 to protect breeding grounds for seabirds and marine mammals. This entire offshore area is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I mention this because it is on these offshore rocks and islands along the coast that Oregon's tufted puffins return each spring to breed, usually arriving in early April. Puffins are burrow nesting seabirds, digging their temporary homes using their sharp claws and strong beaks. If a puffin pair returns to the same burrow year after year, which is common, they may only need a few days to clean out and refurbish their old nest. However, if they need to dig a new burrow, it could take up to 2 weeks. The burrows are usually about 2 to 3 feet deep, sometimes up to 7 feet deep, and often with a slight bend that will provide a little bit of extra protection for both the eggs and the chicks. Once the burrow is dug, both the males and females participate in the housekeeping. They will line the burrow with soft materials such as grass, feathers, sometimes seaweed, and then they maintain the nest throughout the breeding season, which strengthens their pair bond, which is considered really important for a species that is thought to mate for life. During courtship, and sometimes as a greeting ritual, particularly when reuniting at the nest, you will often see puffins rubbing their beaks together. This is an activity called billing. This behavior is also common among other species of birds, including cedar waxwings, doves, pigeons, and albatrosses. The female puffin will lay only one egg per season, but it's an egg which weighs up to 14% of her body weight. 14%. That is comparable to, say, a 150-pound woman giving birth to a 21-pound baby. But for a 1.5-pound puffin, the egg weighs about a quarter pound. Once that egg is laid, the female and male continue sharing family responsibilities, with both of them tending to the egg during the approximate 45-day incubation period. Puffin chicks, which are called pufflings, are born with their eyes open, which is fairly uncommon among bird species. But having their eyes open from birth is an adaptation that helps chicks survive in the darkness of their burrows and allows them to recognize and respond to their parents for feeding from day one. With the egg now hatched, the chick's parents continue their co-parenting arrangement, taking turns to deliver food directly into the burrow for the next 6 to 7 weeks. Now, before you go awarding them the Parents of the Year, know this. Once the chick grows stronger, it is not uncommon for the parents to go out, catch fish, bring them back to the burrow, catch them, and then leave. Which, having recently spent some time with teenagers, I can completely understand why they do this. But then one night, perhaps timed to the full moon, and very likely because they are hungry, the abandoned fledgling jumps into the water during the safety of night and begins its journey out to sea. Fledglings now must learn to fly, to swim, and to fish without any further help from their parents. This transition to independence, some may say tough love, I say tufted love, is a critical and challenging time in the puffin's life. Most young puffins spend about 3 to 4 years at sea, at which point, guided by a strong homing instinct, the puffin will return back to its natal grounds to hopefully breed for the first time and start the cycle all over again. As for the adults, when they head out to open water for the winter, they will undergo an annual molt during which all of their wing feathers are replaced. They also will shed their bill plate or bill covering, as well as their tufts and their bright face. Amazingly, as this happens, they spend several weeks unable to fly or hunt for food. Adult puffins will start to grow their iconic tufts usually around the end of December, and by the time they return to land to breed, which again is about April, they are fully tufted with their bright orange iconic bill, white face, and what I refer to as orange eyeliner. And now for a question I never really thought about until I started working with seabirds, which many of you probably already know, but humor me. If animals need fresh water to survive, how do puffins who live at sea for 8 months, or in the case of the newly fledged, even longer, survive? In other words, what do puffins and other seabirds drink? Tufted puffins, as well as other seabirds, have salt glands that are located above their eyes. In a sense, these glands function like an extra kidney, filtering excess salt from their blood and then excreting it via grooves in their bills. In fact, when you next travel to a coast, and I recommend the Oregon coast, you may notice that gulls often have a drop of liquid at the end of their beak. In many cases, that is the concentrated salt that they've expelled from drinking salt water, and also likely from eating your French fries. So we know what and how they drink when they are at sea for 8 months, but where do tufted puffins go during the non-breeding months? Here's the thing. Here in their southern range, we're not entirely sure. We have not yet successfully tagged puffins in their southern range, but if they travel a similar distance as other puffins that have been tracked, then they're traveling up to 120 miles from their breeding sites. Well, except for this guy, who refused to stop and ask directions and ended up on an island off the coast of Maine with the Atlantic puffins. This photo, you can actually see the size difference between the two species and also the confused look of the Atlantic puffin. And though we don't know exactly where our tufted puffins spend their non-breeding season, we do know that more generally, with the exception of this guy here on the slide, he's now been in Maine for the past 2 years. But the tufted puffin range extends from the Farallon Islands in Northern California up through Alaska, Russia, and Japan. And while their numbers up in Alaska are believed to be fairly stable, here in their southern range, from Northern California up through British Columbia, a range that is linked to a cold water current known as the California Current, the population is experiencing a drastic decline. From over 20,000 in the 1900s, which sounds like an incredibly long time ago until I remind myself that I am from the 1900s, to an estimated 2,000 birds 5 years ago. Okay, let's take a little closer look about what is happening specifically here in Oregon. The most recent coastwide survey, which was done in 2021 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, estimated that we have only 553 tufted puffins spread among 17 colonies, with the largest colony at Finley Rock, which is near a small community called Oceanside, and the second largest at Haystack Rock in a small town on the north coast called Cannon Beach. Haystack Rock is one of the easiest places to see tufted puffins in Oregon, if not the entire Northwest. Its intertidal area is protected as one of Oregon's 7 marine gardens, and above the high tide line is protected as part of the refuge complex, which I mentioned earlier. So it's highly protected, and it's also steep, which are 2 of the reasons we haven't yet been able to tag birds here. At low tides, Haystack Rock, which is 235 feet tall, is connected to the mainland, earning it the distinction as the largest onshore population of tufted puffins in the lower 48. Which means, among other things, it sometimes gets unexpected guests, like this cougar that walked onto the rock in July of 2023 and spent the night out there as the tide came in. Haystack Rock is also home to many other bird species, just a little PR pitch, including rhinoceros auks, common murres, brants, double-crested and pelagic cormorants, pigeon guillemots, harlequin ducks, black oyster catchers, brown pelicans, peregrine falcons, and western gulls, not to mention some beautiful tide pools that you can also explore at low tide. But back to puffins. Data collected over the last 5 decades show that the puffins at Haystack Rock have decreased by about 75%, with the 2024 estimate at only 102 birds. We haven't yet finished analyzing the 2025 data, but we believe that it is actually lower than 102. So we know that they're declining along our entire coast. And we have decades of data that support this unfortunate trend. But we, and by we I mean biologists, are not exactly sure why this is happening. That said, most signs point to one usual suspect: climate change. Specifically, warmer ocean temperatures affecting the availability of prey, invasive plant species making it harder to burrow, invasive animal species destroying habitat or preying on eggs and chicks, and also predators, the most common out here being the bald eagle. And I should mention another factor, and that is all of us, or at least humans, and human-related disturbances. Things like people illegally flying drones, climbing on the rock, and shining laser pointers at seabirds at night, all of which are illegal and all of which, despite a lot of signage, happened last summer and are incredibly stressful for nesting seabirds. So we know they're declining here in Oregon, and we still have questions as to why. But not knowing doesn't mean nothing is being done. Let me share a few highlights about some of the conservation projects. Well, first of all, let me take a quick step back. In 2014, the Natural Resources Defense Council petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list the tufted puffin as federally endangered. However, the subsequent species status assessment deemed that a listing was not warranted, primarily because the population in Alaska is believed to be fairly stable. So while the tufted puffin does not have federal protection, they are listed as endangered by Washington state. They are a species of greatest conservation need in Oregon and a species of special concern in California. In late 2023, my position was actually created to provide more support and encourage more collaboration and coordination around tufted puffin conservation in the California current, with involvement here in Oregon from numerous agencies, researchers, and nonprofits. I mentioned earlier that the tufted puffin is listed as endangered by Washington state. That means, among other things, that they are required to have a species recovery plan. But in Oregon, where the tufted puffin is a priority species, no coordinated plan is required. So, last year, the working group participants representing Oregon worked together to finalize Oregon's first tufted puffin conservation action plan with a 10-year goal of halting the decline. And rather than reading you all 18 pages of the plan, which probably sounds delightful, let me instead share a few of the priority actions that will take place this summer. Oregon State University will continue to collect photos of adult puffins bringing food back to their chicks, allowing us to analyze the diet of puffins. Over the past few years, images of Pacific herring, sardine, larval fish, salmon, squid, lamprey, and smelt have all been recorded. Birds with Fish, as the project is called, is a community science project focused on Oregon seabirds, not just puffins. And the public is also invited to submit photos. And since we're talking about birds with fish, here's a fun fact. Adult puffins feed while they hunt. Unlike merds or guillemots, puffins are not known to bring fish back to land unless they have a chick to feed. So if you see a puffin going into a burrow with a fish, you know there's a puffling inside. The bill of a tufted puffin allows it to carry multiple fish at once. As you can maybe see from this photo, the upper jaw has tiny spines called denticles that help them hold the captured fish in place while they hunt for more. It is not uncommon to see puffins with 8 to 10 fish, but the most fish ever documented in a bill at the same time, 62 fish at once, though it was an Atlantic puffin. But it does make the phrase eat like a bird somewhat questionable. So in addition to birds with fish, volunteers are being trained to assist with the tufted puffin monitoring at various locations along the Oregon coast, with a focus on Haystack Rock and Cannon Beach, which I mentioned earlier. The data, which is analyzed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, provides us with valuable information regarding population estimates, breeding success, and also disturbances, such as bald eagles coming in for a snack. In this case, the eagle is grabbing a common murre, but its presence can cause what is known as a flush, or a disturbance where seabirds suddenly take flight, which results in the adults abandoning eggs or chicks. In fact, if you ever come to visit Haystack Rock and suddenly see a lot of birds take off at the same time, chances are you will also spot an eagle, though sometimes it is a falcon. We are also, thanks to a fabulous volunteer in his boat that is conveniently named the Tufted Puffin, we will be continuing to conduct offshore monitoring at Tufted Puffin colonies. The larger of the rocks in this photo, the flat one on the right there, That's Finley Rock, the one we think hosts the largest tufted puffin colony in Oregon. Also related to monitoring, last summer we started to use drones to help us better analyze habitat at both existing and historic breeding areas. And this year we are working to analyze those images. Now, I want to acknowledge that the use of drones is understandably contentious and also illegal in many places along the Oregon coast unless you have a special permit. Drones can not only disturb seabirds by creating unnecessary stress, especially during breeding, they can also disturb our outdoor experiences. And in this photo, you are seeing a photo of Face Rock, which is also a tufted puffin colony. So I want to emphasize that I believe drones are a tool that, if used after obtaining the required permits and following best practices, can actually help us fill data gaps without causing undue harm to the very seabirds we are trying to help. And really, drones are far more economical, more environmental, and less intrusive than the helicopters that have been used in the past to conduct similar surveys. And then I'm really excited about this next project. This summer at 2 locations, Yaquina Headlands, which is in Newport, and Hunter's Island in Southern Oregon, just north of Brookings, we plan to experiment with a conservation technique known as social attraction. Puffins are colonial seabirds, which has nothing to do with colonialism, but everything to do with the fact that they live in colonies, or rather, they live in groups. They are very social seabirds that recognize the presence of other birds as evidence of suitable habitat. It's similar to being on a road trip prior to the existence of Yelp and stopping in a new town for dinner. If you were to see one lighted restaurant with a lot of happy customers and another looking sad and empty, many of you, no judging if not, but many of you are likely to go and eat where more people are. Puffins do a similar thing and find comfort in numbers, building what is called social confidence. The use of social attraction for seabirds and specifically for puffins is not new. In the mid-1900s, the population of Atlantic puffins on islands off the coast of Maine were all but gone due to hunting for both meat and for fashion, a trend I hope will never return. About 50 years ago, a young scientist named Steve Kress found an old journal that documented that Atlantic puffins once bred on a few of the islands off of Maine's coast. And so he, young and full of hope, decided to conduct an experiment. In 1973, he received permission to translocate Atlantic puffin chicks from Newfoundland, which is home to over 95% of North America's breeding Atlantic puffins, to Maine. He created artificial burrows for them on Eastern Egg Rock, one of the small islands where Atlantic puffins had historically thrived. It took 4 years after that first chick fledged for an adult to return. 4 years of Steve going out there every day, looking at the sky, wondering if a puffin would return. Knowing that puffins are social creatures, he wanted to encourage the returning bird and the others that followed to land, burrow, and mate. So he took a leap of faith and installed decoys and mirror boxes to create the illusion of a thriving Atlantic puffin colony. Over time, the number of puffins visiting the island slowly increased and eventually nested, resulting in the first restoration of a puffin colony anywhere in the world. Today, 5 decades later, the National Audubon Society's Project Puffin, now called the Seabird Institute, has restored more than 1,000 puffin pairs to 3 islands in Maine. But even more exciting, techniques developed during that initial social attraction project have helped to restore rare and endangered seabirds worldwide. And we are just starting to experiment with social attraction out west. So here in Oregon, we will be installing decoys at those 2 locations and then monitoring both projects using remote cameras, primarily, at least initially, to survey if puffins are present in the area and also if they show any interest in the decoys. At the project that is at Yaquina Head, which is on a headlands and will be visible to the public, we are also integrating a community science element that will be asking visitors to share any photos they may capture of puffins interacting with the decoys. So we're trying to generate a little bit more of public interest and awareness by asking them to participate. And just in case you're wondering, the decoys are realistic enough to be effective, sometimes too effective, as demonstrated by this juvenile bald eagle at a project up in Washington. And then alongside with the monitoring and social attraction projects, the Tufted Puffin Working Group is also following the legislative session to ensure policies are in place that support seabird conservation. In fact, last week, we just had a bill pass that will provide more funding for wildlife conservation, and especially for species of conservation need, like the tufted puffin. And if and when any of you are able to head out west, I can almost guarantee that you'll be able to see a lot more tufted puffins in Oregon, thanks to the Oregon Coast Aquarium. And by that, I mean the puffins will be on cars, but proceeds from the latest license plate will benefit a new seabird and marine mammal rehabilitation center. And then I'm working with local and regional, state, and nonprofits to better inform the public about our iconic seabird, giving presentations and writing articles. The latest issue of Audubon magazine featured the tufted puffin, which was the first time it made the cover. And I'm also working with schools. And speaking of schools, I wanted to end by sharing something that always makes me smile. About 2 years ago, a group of kindergartners, our next wave of tufted puffin protectors, participated in an art project. Each student selected a photo and then recreated it using watercolors. As they were painting, the teacher shared puffin facts with them. She let me know that while she didn't think they were listening because they were so focused on their art, and probably because they're 5 and 6 year olds, she later heard them sharing the various facts with the adults who picked them up. The paintings covered all types of styles, including abstract. I will say that Romeo was the youngest of the artists and probably did better than I could. And then Audubon, after getting permission from the original photographers, the school, and the parents, shared the paintings on social media, which, as you can imagine, generated a lot of positive reactions. Because really, trust me, you can't not smile when you see or even say puffin. And I truly hope that these amazing seabirds will remain here in their southern range for future generations to enjoy. And with that, if you have any questions for a non-biologist or anything else to share, please let me know. Thank you so much.